Construction evaluation is supposed to be an easy exam to pass, but having a good study strategy is the best recommendation that I can offer. Hi guys, I'm Brandon with I'm Studio, and today I'm going to give you my experience, my best recommendations for passing construction and evaluation exam in the Architecture Registration Exam series. These are the exams for passing and becoming a licensed architect. In this video, part of my How to Pass the ARE series on YouTube, I'll be detailing what the exam is, my experience passing, failing, or just passing and winging it. My thoughts as well on suggested resources, my thoughts on study, and also common pitfalls, myths, and actual exam strategy. Check the description below for other videos in this series. Subscribe to the I'm Studio channel for more great architecture practice and tools and tutorials for architects and designers. All right, this format for today is going to be a little more laid back because I have some resources with me for this exam study material. And so you see me in the lower corner, and I'll just be guiding you as I go through this material. First of all, yes, construction evaluation is going to be visible both in the guidelines, and the guidelines is really a NCARB manual that talks about pretty much how to take the exam. So it's sort of like a talk about the exam more, and it talks about the new format, PSI test centers, and it talks about the exam structure, exam navigation, receiving the score, etc. And then it actually talks about the divisions really quickly, exam content. However, the ARE 5 handbook, which I actually didn't see on the website, is actually it should be there. I've contacted them about it not being there, so they should fix that soon. But the ARE registration handbook goes into depth for each of these sections. You see, you got about 20 to 30 pages for each exam, and these are each with practice questions. And so these are some good resources. I definitely will be going through them a little more in depth because I think it's useful to see that what they provide as their source for passing. And let's go ahead and look at the construction evaluation. And these are going to be pretty much similar through both these sort of the handbook and the guidelines until you get to the point where you're seeing practice questions. And so I'm not going to read these verbatim. I'm just going to talk about it in general. So this right here is going to be the exam for you. Just really quickly, this is a 3-hour and 40-minute exam with 75 questions. So if you do the calculation, that's actually including your break. So you can always take your break, and you look at that. This information is saying it's 30-minute breaks. So essentially, it's 3 hours and 10 minutes for your exam. I pretty much take my breaks when I do the exam. So essentially your appointment, your test is timed at 3 hours. So you see this sort of little variation. There's like a 10-minute in between. But essentially, if you do the math, that's 180 divided by 75. So you could definitely see it would be 2 minutes per question or something close to that. But what in reality happens is you really need to focus on your case studies, because your case studies are going to be where you need to spend your time. Okay, and here are the divisions, and I'm going to tell you how I sort of saw these. It's pre-construction activities, it's construction observation, it's administrative procedures and protocols, it's project closeout and evaluation, and construction, and then has the references. It's only 4 sections. So essentially you are in this exam looking at what happens at the end of the design phases. It starts with schematic design development, construction documents. Then as you go into bidding and construction administration, that's the hot area for CE. And what you're going to be needing to do is understand how to guide this part smoothly, because you are the representative of the client, and you need to be really giving them the best information for these processes. You are their confidant, I guess, or the agent for this process. And so you are going to be working with those who are the contractors. You're going to be working, of course, with your design team, your consultants, and you're going to really be managing your end of the contract. And so that's going to be definitely like one of the core areas that you see in this exam, and you'll see that in the resources as you go to the references, because it talks about a lot of contracts that are needed to guide the owner, to guide the architect, and to guide the contractor. And so these, or the builder, these are going to be these three parties that are going to be organized. And so that's one of the key things. And you will see at the end of the handbook section, you really do need to go through all the documents. That's why a lot of people would go through the AIA contract documents for like certain exams like PJM, project management, or practice management, because it talks about a lot of the exams, and you'll go and read them. This is the A101, that's the one between owner and contractor. A201, this is general conditions, and then there are some ones about contractors and owner, and instruction to the bidders, that's the bidding phase. Standard B101 is the architect and owner agreement. It also has a standard form of agreement between the architect and consultants, and then change orders, certification for payment. I think knowing the difference between these things is pretty critical, and also knowing things like the continuation sheet. I think these are very simply to search on the, and I'm going to go to the screen so you can see this. These are very easy to find these references on the AIA website, and you can see like a little blurb of them. I went through these documents myself, but essentially I do think if you can get that time to go through these are some things definitely to be going through. And so you are essentially going to be navigating this set of documents as you are going through your work with the project. And so you're going to be managing that pre-construction based on the contract documents, which is something you definitely need to be knowing about, because the contract documents, there's a great diagram I'll give you. Like the contract documents are pretty much a scope. There's a project drawings, there's a project manual, there's the contract documents, and then there are things that are outside of the contract documents, and it's really important for you to know those things. This is not really exam sort of tester, but essentially those are some of the things that you need to know the difference between. And I'll put some links for you to know those in the description. So that's the pre-construction activities, construction observation. So that's essentially you being on site and taking care of things that are important for that particular phase. And then you will need to know for sure about the administrative procedures, what happens with something needs to be rebuilt, what happens when you need to take care of something that is not available for one of the materials. The contractor has said, we're going to build this project with this much money, we're going to do it in this way. What happens when there's an issue? You're going to be going according to those contract documents, and that's why when we go into administrative procedures and protocols, you are really the first decision maker when that comes as the architect, the licensed architect. And then finally, we're going to look at the project closeout and evaluation. And you see the heavy parts for this exam are the construction observation and the administrative procedures. Essentially, that's, you're really going to need to be knowing what's happening on site. So that's the exam structure in general, and some of the key resources. If you go back to the resources page, now it does talk about these particular resources down here of 2 books, the Architect Handbook of Professional Practice and CSI Master Format. This is great to definitely know the different sections of divisions, because you are going to be thinking about specifications a whole lot. So that's what I saw in this exam myself, is definitely knowing a little bit of the nuance between these exam sections, with talking about the documents, the contract documents. Okay, so how do you bid this? There are also in the reference matrix, which in the handbook you can just click and it will take you there. Yeah, there should be, I know where it is. But there's a reference matrix at the end, and it talks about different, and this is for the handbook, and tells you different things that are good reading sources, and it talks about Architect Handbook Professional Practice, CSI Master Format. But there's also the Project Resource Manual, or CSI Manual Practice. I found that really helpful because I didn't know about bidding, and there's a lot of important bidding information there, especially thinking about public projects. Knowing those sort of nuance is really important because it's going to ask you those exam questions. Public project, 3 contractors, the bidding, one of them is not bonded. They have the lowest price, but if they're not bonded, they're not qualifying for that public bidding project. So things like that are reasons to go through this additional resource, which is not listed on the main page, but it's definitely very useful. And you see the documents also here that are referenced that would be good to go through. Okay, so all that said, let's talk about some of the, after thinking about that structure, before we look at some of those little questions, let's talk about the myths around the test. So some people think, you can just go in because you've been to some project sites, you've walked around, you might have done some submittals, but in reality, there's a lot of book knowledge that's needed for this test, especially thinking about things like bidding, thinking about things like understanding and really pretty much being the arbiter or the first decision maker for issues. You have to know about how these documents actually function, not just, okay, this is named this. So that's a really important reason to be looking at these and looking at some case studies around them. And also there's some, I think some thoughts about the contract documents are really not as in-depth, but they are really in-depth, and it's book knowledge in terms of the legal ramifications. For instance, with talking about bidding, but knowing like the architect's role is really critical here. And thinking about things, for instance, like specifications is like, it's not just memorizing the list, it's actually knowing like the underlying things. For instance, if you're using concrete, you're going to be specifying wood that's going to hold the concrete. So that's going to be multiple sections. Like that's part of the exam that's saying like, which divisions are going to be needed for this project. You see windows, you see metal, that's going to be some of the type of exam questions. And of course, if we look back at the exam, as we're going to get into it, we're going to talk about all the exam question types. They're all going to be there. And so you're going to really need to have this, don't come with the myths to the exam, come with your eyes open to what you're going to be facing. So I'm going to go into my experience taking this exam, and I just really go into the day of it a little bit, talk about some of the resources I studied before. I took the exam twice, and so I'm going to tell you, like, that first time I did hear that it was easy. Actually, in the AIA or NCARB report, you do find out that there is actually a lot of passing on this exam. Like, in terms of the pass rates, you see there's a high pass rate for this. However, for me, it was like I just really didn't have that much time on the after phase. I worked in a firm where we really didn't do a lot of CA, so a lot of that wasn't even really negotiated. So I had to really get into like what happens at the end of the project. Unfortunately, I was doing a little bit of project management. However, that first time I just wasn't as confident for the specifications, knowing about bidding and knowing about how really to navigate those documents. And that really hurt me there. So I think it definitely said like, you were like a couple answers off. It wasn't like a total fail for that first exam. And so that was, a little bit of heartbreak. But that was after doing some really great ARV exam prep, which is great materials, as well as I think some architect hacks, that sort of basic sort of testing. I did a little bit of going through essentially it's a little bit deceiving for them, as I show you the books that are recommended. It only has like a few books, but that's deceptive. It might only have a few books, but it really is important for you to know a lot of things when you go into the exam. So that's a fun sort of issue here. So if you look at these references here, it has like two books, and there's a third one that's not mentioned here, but it's down below. And those are actually really important. In fact, I actually bought the Audible or the Kindle version for the other book. And the thing is, I didn't even finish it. And so that's the type of thing that you have to challenge yourself on, because it's like, how depth are you with these questions? And do you actually have the questions like, okay, like I was really struggling to find out in my studying process, how in the world do you deal with, like, what if the project goes over budget or something, by the contractor? Does the owner get all the money back? That sort of thing. Those are the type of questions that I really had to start researching for myself, and so I had to go like a little depth to it. My second time taking it, I really was like a little, I knew some areas I was not as experienced in. So my second time taking it, I actually had some time looking at Amber book, where I really went through all the different materials and the science of, metals, wood, plastics, different types of plumbing. Like, these are things, of course, that are more useful for PPD, project planning design, and project development documentation exams. However, those things, helped me, because I was like having a little clearer thought about how things are actually working together. And so when I put those things together, I was more equipped to handle what was going on for CE. I think Amber book is really much all I really was studying for with that. And so I did, of course, my little Quizlet, where I was doing like little quizzes on the specifications, but I was also definitely going through I was like pushing myself a little bit further and going through the different types of exams about, let me go a little bit further. I definitely, because I believe I took the PPD before this, or sort of did like those on the same time frame. So in that process, I was actually definitely taking that practice exam that NCARB offers, and now I believe it's starting to offer for each exam full length for each division. So I really had to really start using some of my resources there, because essentially these fails were in the previous year. Like I'd gone through December, and in January I was like, I need to start taking these new exams, and so pretty much I knew I needed to be taking these exams, and I needed to really just spend as much time as possible studying. So I was doing practice exams a couple days a week. I was doing quizzes every day on my bike, and pretty much when I went into the exam, I had like this super world of exposure to this other side. And even though there's like a few books that are recommended, everything I read before was like incredible for it. And so essentially I was studying for PPD, PDD, and CE at the same time. And so I am telling you that that's a recommendation that I could offer for that situation. So here's how to study for this exam. Yes, the passing was great, but like that whole process is something that I had to go through, and just the experience of it was great. So here's how to study for it. You're gonna really study, like I said, for all those exams, because you have to think about the architecture project very comprehensively. And knowing those contract documents needs to be more than just saying, I know what it's called and a couple different terminologies. It's knowing about the situational needs of the project. And then, knowing about materials is also very important, because you like saying, if I know that a stone will be used, there needs to be an attachment for the stone. Do you know the specifications that might be needed when you're talking about different of those issues? This exam is not very much about the site, but it's definitely about what happens on the site. And so knowing things like the general conditions, knowing what are the sections of it, knowing what are the sections of specification, you're going to break down specification into 3 parts, so you need to have that understanding of what is the specification, how is it going to be used, how are the general conditions divided, what is in the project document, what goes in the project manual, what's in the contract documents, so having that clear understanding of all those elements is going to be really important. So your study strategy is really to be comprehensive. Don't just think, oh, there are 3 books recommended, I'm just going to do those. And ARE5 community has some great resources for what to study within the handbook. But of course, like things like mass format, the question is like, it's like a big list of lists. So I think things like having like abbreviated study elements online is going to be really useful, and that's one of the things I did. When you're reading the contracts, again, it's going for depth. Like, look for situational things about it, and that's why I do like definitely architect exam prep. As they talk about the contracts, they have like a whole video or a whole audio section just about the B101 and A101. And the fact is, you can find a lot of these on YouTube as well, and those are great because you just go in depth into that contract. And it's really important to have the understanding of what does it mean when you're in that phase according to that document, whose responsibility is what. So spending a few hours on each of those, not just reading it, but go look at some commentary, look at how it's actually put together. That's going to be really useful for you. Here's now how to study now and then take the exam. So here's that divide into the taking of the exam. Okay, so how to take the exam is you're going to go in and pretty much, you do your study cards, but that day of, definitely, I keep saying this, just be calm and meditated, look at the parts that you are having the struggle with, If you know a lot about those, a particular area, fine. But if there's an area you're not as comfortable with, for instance, if they're gonna do on the exam, they're gonna say, okay, we had to switch and do a substitution for a material. So we need you to calculate the lowest price, one of those. And I believe that's also on the practice questions. That's even a great thing for the practice. We'll even look at some of these. You will take these practice exams for yourself. You will go through these, and you will go through them and look at why did this pass? Why did it not pass? And again, yes, there are the 4 areas that they are going to test you on: understanding, or they say the UA, assessing and evaluating. These are all going to be part of the understandings that you'll need. So just be thinking about that's what their goal is when they're testing you. So now when you see a question, I think it says, okay, which of the following should the contractor submit to the owner, to the architect during the pre-construction phase? Okay, check all that apply. Okay, so boom, I think going through questions like this, knowing and hearing about, what does it mean for that document for the beginning of the phase of the project, any exam resource you use should be useful for telling you what happens at this phase. So knowing the ones that are going to be needed should be second nature. And of course, when you take the exam, because of the way it's structured, you'll just hold your eye so you won't see the answers. But it's really important to know particular things like this, knowing the difference between an allowance, an alternate, on a unit price. So like that's just basic definitions. So memorization is going to be key. So when you're taking that exam, you're going to be saying, okay, like because you studied, you have like this match, and that's the exceptional use of these exam cards, and or index cards, or even index card app like I use. Being able to like really quickly match these is going to be really key. The next thing we talk about construction observation, so that's the section right after, so number 2. It will definitely ask you, how do you deal with something? So this is like during a construction, owner says, hey, you need to change this, right? Understanding that something needs to be done, but it's not really going to change everything. That's understanding a lot about what happens according to A 101 and the B 101. So, okay, something has to be changed, knowing that you need a construction change directive, and the change order can be done later. That's this, just like order of events, that you have to be understanding. So that's a great reason to be doing like videos, understanding, okay, look at the levels. Okay, this thing is something that the architect is needing to straighten out about a project. It's a supplemental instruction, right? Or this is going to change the budget, right? That's a change order. But if this thing has to be done and we can't really negotiate right now, that's a construction change directive. So things like that are what you're going to be like remembering during the exam, like these key particular moments, and you'll be ready to go into, hey, look, this is going to be the way you handle that situation. It's sort of like when you're playing, if you play a first-person game, what type of ammunition do you need? That's how you're going to be confronting this. And knowing about the different sections is important as well, because it essentially gives you targets. I'm going to look for these situations. I'm going to look for these definitions. That's going to guide how I answer these questions. And so also, for sure, you can look and you'll see on the exam, you'll see different questions like, okay, look at this. During construction observation, architect reviews the installation of roof sheathing. Check the material of the photo that contributes to the required fire separation between adjacent townhouses. So, obviously by knowing a little bit about code, this is where it's like, hey, look, isn't this PPD? But it is. It's talking about this area that's separating the townhomes. It's talking about a parapet. It's talking about how, like this is fire coding. And so this area is going to be what's important between the two townhomes. So, that's why in my quiz that I even use photo and looking at photo evidence. And that's why Amber Book is really helpful here as well, because I was going through a lot of photographs, a lot of videos of what happens. In fact, I'm not even talking about the other books because they were not recommended, but they're actually sort of recommended. It's like nice to look at some of the building construction illustrated and such to know about what's going on when you look at an architecture site or architecture situation. So let's go to the third section. So and the exam is not going to be in this order. It's going to be all over the place. So essentially you're just going to put on the goggles for the type of question. You identify the type of question immediately, and you start saying, okay, this is a numbers questions. This is a question about pre-construction. This is a question about the administrative. Let me look at an answer according to this. And so, for instance, this one is definitely, it's talking about extending of a contract time. So there's some useful thoughts from the project management exam here, for sure, for some of the things about managing the staff. But essentially, when you're going into the contract document, you're talking about when something is being constructed, you're going to the AI contracts, you are knowing some of this, you're balancing it and you're weighing it. So this example talks about, hey, look, this is difference between these numbers is going to equal to extending the contract by 20 days. This is talking about a contract indicates the completion time for a project is 465 calendar days, including 45 days for weather, extremely bad weather, delay construction by 65 days, the contractor has requested extension in the number of contract days due to extremely bad weather. So essentially you are going to be comparing these two numbers. 65 days was not included, 45 days is what was included. So essentially we are going to really have it extending the contract. So that's like this weighing issue, right? Like, you know, like understanding when you're going to like give and take for what the contract has been agreed upon versus, hey, look, this is out of the contract. That's going to be one of these type of questions. So knowing that is going to be definitely something of researching and reading about the contracts and how they're actually working, you know, how a contract is made, and then, you know, really just saying, okay, if you give me that contract, I'll look at it. I'll look at how many days are contingency. I'll look at the contingency, you know, I'll look at the change order, you know, fees, etc., you know, and then I'll put it in there. And I'm going to go down to this section. I don't know if they include this. So this is one of the number questions where it talks about, it talks about after construction has started, the contractor finds that a specified carpet has been discontinued. The budgeted cost was 17 square yard with a total of 3,500 square yards of carpet needed. Okay, the one, this question is giving like two alternatives. And so it's essentially going to tell you the difference. Now, one of the things that some of these answers do, you know, again, you'll have to write this on your digital whiteboard. You definitely want to make sure that you're going to be considering if it says that it's going to need the contractor overhead, that everything you're going to do, you're going to multiply it by a contractor overhead. Unfortunately, fortunately for this one, this is only talking about the cost of it. It's not talking about the contractor price. So you're just going to really be talking about the difference in price for this. And something like this, which there's a change in price, would equal a change order, which might give money back to the owner or might add more fee to the project. So a question like that is, that's this type of question. You know, I'm not going to go directly into this question because, again, I'm going to reference this for you. You can go through it. There's a lot of people who actually go through it. These are actually even on the NCARB videos. But the idea for me is to really get you to have the eyes to say, when I see this question, when I see this challenge, like, I'm going to put these lenses on. Like, okay, I'm looking at difference of numbers. I'm going to start making calculations out. And so actually Black Spectacles was useful when I looked at some of their videos, because they have a lot of calculations, and that's really useful. For me, it's just about getting the right lens for the problem. And finally, section 4 is about project closeout and evaluation. So you wouldn't see these questions. It's definitely about, like, okay, the project is done, you know, like how many times is the architect going to inspect the project? And it's pretty much twice. And that final inspection is the inspection. You know, the architect is not inspecting the project when you're doing a site visit. It's really that initial site visitation, and is that final site visitation where you're saying, boom, the project is ready to go. So knowing about things like pretty much the final or, you know, substantial completion and final completion. You know, substantial completion is what you're focused on. This again is useful in a lot of the podcasts when they're talking about constructions. Yeah, so that's what I would direct toward, because knowing about this phase is going to go through a lot more than just saying, okay, if the project is finished, you know, the owner pays. You know, you actually are going to be signing off on the pay receipts. Each phase, you know, or each, you know, pretty much, is it every month? You know, how many times are you walking through? There's a schedule of inspections. All these are something you would see if you're in office. If you haven't really worked that many years in the firm or in the industry, maybe some of these would be new to you. But again, going through these resources and some of the videos, and again, like, I super recommend those resources for the exam that I have listed, like Amber Book or ARE exam prep is really useful. Amber Book is really useful for sure, because you're going to be going into like a lot of material science as well as you're thinking of this. Even though this is contracts, the contract area is really useful in Amber Book. And so, essentially, like, for instance, like this, we were looking at, okay, this is a punch list, right? If you see a list of these, can you tell which one is actually going to delay the project? Obviously, paint is not a major issue. The bathtub draining, that's plumbing. That's multiple facilities, right? A light bulb is not. It's just a element that's added to it, right? The filter grill, this is just like sort of decorative. However, drainage is dealing with like multiple systems, and that's why a question like this, where it says the contractor notified about substantial completion, architect inspected the work and followed, prepared the list of incomplete work. So it's asking like which thing must be completed before the architect can issue the certificate of substantial completion. And a bathtub doesn't drain properly is something like you just get drilled into your head, because this is requiring multiple systems. And so that sort of logic that you'll develop through going through and really looking at particularly each project phase, and those resources, those books, they're really useful. Again, I read it while on a bike. I was just going to go through that, just scrolling through my my resource to see it just on my phone or my big tablet. But understanding that in depth is going to be how that drills into your head. And so that's going through, like, just looking at the multiple choice ones for sure, even though some of them, the multiple choice is just really an answer for a number that you have to calculate. However, looking at the end of the exam, the way I did it was I would take maybe 40 multiple choice, and then I would start a case study before I took a break. Now, I believe PSI you can take multiple breaks, so I didn't really want to do a lot of that. I actually would go ahead and do one of my case studies before the exam, and then just start the first question of the next case study, so I'd get like familiar with it. However, I had to check through each exam after I had come back to it, and what I did is I went ahead and I used every single tool. I scratched out answers that didn't work. I used highlight. I tried to make it easy for myself. Narrow it down. Make sure to have like that review in your head, so you're making it easy for yourself. If something is easy, just go with the first thing in your head. Don't spend too much time. Again, from Architect Exam Prep, they were suggesting like really spend like a minute, about a minute for each multiple choice, and then try to do like 5 minutes for your case study. And that case study time, essentially, you have to read through the documents, you have to check them all, like make sure you know where they are. I had gotten to the point when I was with Amber Book that I really knew I needed to know the IBC, and I didn't mention that much because obviously IBC is super important. International Building Code, it's super important for the PPD exam and the PDD exam. But here again, it is going to be on some of your exam resources. However, I would definitely notify you that you are going to have to be going through some specifications. That's going to be part of this exam. So being able to navigate your way around the specifications to find out the particular information. For instance, if it's saying, hey, look at this material, is this acceptable to the spec? Knowing how to go through that quickly to find out, oh, boom, this project doesn't make spec. That's when your, that case study thinking comes around. And, that's your case study. You have to be both evaluative, but you're using a similar concept of getting your lens on to see the particular answer, but you're also making sure that you're giving the time for the whole, because when you're reading it, you're looking for specific information, you're looking for indexes. I believe the exam is going a lot faster. At one point it was like sort of slow for me. That was sort of hard, but when you know where to look, it's always going to be easier to locate things. Yeah, essentially, and when you're finished, you go through your exam, you take a calm breath. If you have like a lot of time left, still be calm. Don't go double checking everything, the ideas I go through, and I just say, hey, you know, I'm confident in the answer. I mark the ones I'm not sure about. You know, some exams I had dozens marked. Definitely after taking my second exam where I was going to pass it, I didn't have as much because essentially I was just removing lack of confidence. So I was a little more confident. But then essentially after going through it again, I just said, boom, I'm finished the exam. And I passed, and so it was a great feeling. That's just going to be the feeling that you have because you understand what is required to pass this exam is knowing about construction, knowing about the things that are needed for a project to be successful. You put that in, you put the time in, and you will achieve a great result because you have spent the time in those areas. You know, it might say there's a few books and a few documents, but the idea is, you know, you're going to make sure that you're getting comprehensive knowledge to pass this exam. All right, so I think that's be all for my sort of experience and talking about the exam. This definitely was more of a pretty much I'm showing the document with my take on the exam. So I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, you know, leave them in the comments. I'd love to help. I'm trying to make this definitely more useful, even though most of my content is making videos for different tutorials, different modeling, because I definitely love design. But this is also really important. A lot of architects are really trying to do better on the exam, and like me finishing in 10 months was really a lot of effort from my side, and so sharing that is just a natural thing. People need help with that. I hope you the best in your CE as you're taking it. It's not going to be as easy to say, but if you do the right study, it's going to be easy. So thanks for watching this ARE series video. Check the description for related videos, and subscribe to the IM Studio channel and share this video with others who are interested in architecture and design content. Thanks for watching.